So today we are learning about Philip Freneau, the poet of the American Revolution. That's likely a name he gave himself, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So Philip Freneau was born in 1752 in New York City, so we're still under British control at that point. As he grows older, he decides to go to Princeton. He rooms there with James Madison, who would go on to be one of our presidents. When he goes into Princeton, he's thinking, I'm going to be a minister. That's a thing that a lot of young men are going to do in this time. They go, I'm going to be a minister. It's a good job. It's a respectable job. It's an honest job. But as Freneau goes through Princeton, he realizes that, one, he's a very talented writer, and two, he's much more political than he would have thought. He kind of grows into politics in this time at Princeton. So basically, he decides coming out of school, we're right at the beginning of the American Revolution, just a couple of years before it really kicks off. We're post-Boston Massacre, pre-Lexington and Concord. Freneau decides, I'm going to go into writing about politics. So he doesn't stick around in the States for a while, though. He dips out to the West Indies for a year or two, and when he comes back, the revolution is kind of in full swing. He comes back to Jersey in 1778, immediately joins the militia, and becomes a ship's captain. He studied navigation, was in the West Indies, so that kind of worked out. He might not be the best ship captain. He does get captured. He spends 6 weeks on a British prison ship. Now, I know a prison ship is an idea that we might not be familiar with today. We have a lot of prisons and a lot of prisoners, but they're all firmly on solid ground. But back then, because the British didn't know what land they would control from 1 month to the next, they would just store their prisoners on ships and they would anchor them off the coast. That way, if they lost the land, they didn't lose the prisoners. Those prisoners didn't go right back to fighting. Land was also a hot commodity. It was just easier to keep the prisoners on ships. Easier isn't always better for the prisoners, though. And those prison ships were a miserable, miserable place to be. Freneau spent about 6 weeks there before he got out. Freneau spends the time after the war. All right, he's kind of buddying around with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. He's nowhere near as important, those guys, but they convince him to start a paper. And he starts a paper called the National Gazette. Now, you remember, we had guys like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who before the Revolution and during the Revolution were all kind of on the same side. When we look back in history, we look at them as founding fathers. They're all the good guys. But in the post-war period, they both had different ideas of what America should look like. So guys like Madison and Jefferson supporting Freneau, that newspaper, the National Gazette, is going to be very pro-Thomas Jefferson. It's going to push all of the principles and ideas that Jefferson supports. Conversely, that means it's going to shit all over George Washington. It's just kind of how it is. Freneau really, really didn't like that guy. But here's the thing. George Washington is also the president of the United States now. So he's going to kind of get batted around a little bit, Freneau. He never is as successful or as famous or as well respected as he thinks that he should be. And while he's doing the journalism thing, he's also writing poetry. By 1790, he has 2 collected versions of his poems. And people know them. People know who Philip Freneau is. They just don't look at him in the way that he thinks they should. The title, The Poet of the American Revolution, it might be one he gave himself. It might be one his friends gave him. But that's kind of how he's remembered. A guy who was kind of the poet of the American Revolution. Freneau, in the early 1800s, when he's in his 50s, he's had enough of politics in a way. He's had enough of journalism. He retires to his farm down, I believe, in Monmouth, New Jersey. Battle of Monmouth, remember it. And he basically decides to dedicate his time to writing essays, some political, and writing poems. Now, his poems often are political, and they're also kind of satirical, and they're poking fun at things in a way to make a point. He's also writing poetry about the American Revolution still. Right? He's growing old now. He fondly remembers the time where he and his friends were basically heroes fighting for a cause. Right? Even if the friendships have kind of frayed or not gone in the direction he thought they would. On top of that, he's writing about something that's distinctly American. We call them the natives, but they would have called them the American Indians back then. So he writes quite a few poems about the American Indians. That's something that poets in Europe couldn't really do. They didn't have that knowledge. They didn't have that context. So as we start to form a distinctly American literary voice, topics that other people haven't been writing about for hundreds or thousands of years are ones that we're going to gravitate to. And Freneau does some nice work talking about Native Americans. or the American Indians, as he would have called them. The other thing Freneau writes about that Europeans didn't really write about was America itself. And I don't mean the idea of America. He did write about that. I mean the physical land of America. Freneau connects to nature in a way that other poets might not have done, and in a way that poets certainly hadn't really done in this country. All right, it's a new country, it's a young country, but this land is what we have fought over for years. And we didn't talk a lot about the land. We didn't talk a lot about geography. We talked about some of the resources. We talked about the different areas that the British were in and the French were in and the Spanish were in pre-war. We talked about things that the land gave us, but we didn't talk about the land, about how beautiful it was, about how special it was, about why we thought it was worth fighting for. And Freneau does talk about that. Okay, so we have Philip Freneau writing about distinctly American things. He was born here, he was raised here, he fought for this country, and when Freneau is 80 years old, he's coming home to his farm down in South Jersey in the middle of December, and there's a snowstorm. And Freneau, as an 80-year-old man walking by himself, becomes lost in the snow, and he freezes to death and dies. And they bury him not far from where he fell in Manawan, New Jersey. And from then till now, it's not that Freneau has become a forgotten name. That name is still there, but it's not a name that we talk about a lot. But Freneau influenced a lot of people. Besides influencing and being a voice for the people he fought with and lived with and worked with, he also influenced guys like William Cullen Bryant and Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalist poets. He influenced Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden. We're going to read that in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And he also even influenced, through his darker and more gothic images, guys like Edgar Allan Poe, who we all know. So Freneau's legacy might not be the one that he would have chosen. He wouldn't have perhaps chosen to inspire people who were more famous in the end than he was, but it's definitely still there. So the work Freneau does as a new American poet, it's important to Americans today still. So the very next thing we're going to do after this Ed Puzzle is an Ed Puzzle on Philip Freneau's poem, The American Soldier, where we'll read that poem together. So complete this one and take a look at that. Thanks.